Hello there! As advertised, here is the follow-up video to my What Else I Saw in March video. If you happen to have correctly guessed that this is what I was going to be talking about, congratulations! So from the end of February to the very beginning of April, my parents and I watched The Winds of War and its sequel, War and Remembrance. The Winds of War is a 1983 miniseries based on the 1971 work of historical fiction by Herman Wouk. I've wanted to read the book and watch the miniseries for some time now, especially because a few of you have recommended them to me, but I've been on the fence about which I should do first. Do I want to read the book, or do I want to just watch the miniseries first? I ended up deciding to watch it first, which I know is crazy talk to some people, and hopefully I won't regret it. I don't think I will. I do still hope to read the book, and I think rather than this diminishing my ambition to read it, I think this has actually whet my appetite. Both miniseries are Dan Curtis productions, and Wouk himself contributed to the screenplays. That must have been a very difficult job. Writers seldom want to cut anything from their books, and these books were based on years of research and partially influenced by Wouk's own experiences, so there was probably very little that he wanted to let go of. In the tradition of the historical fiction epic, where the narrative centers around a fictional main character who is placed in a strategic position to interact with real-life figures and take part in real events, this story focuses on the fictional Henry family. The father, Pug, played on screen by Robert Mitchum, his wife Rhoda, and their 3 adult children. Pug's position as a naval attaché gets him into key places like Berlin and London and Moscow on high-profile assignments. Meanwhile, his younger son, Byron, goes to Italy and falls in love with an older American woman, Natalie Jastrow, while working for her uncle Aaron, a prominent Jewish writer. So you can tell that this miniseries covers a lot of bases. I really admired the composition and intricacy of the whole thing. It's a massive undertaking with a lot of working parts, and mostly, I think everything works together quite well. The personal, fictional storylines don't get shortchanged, but neither does the chronicle of the war. In addition to Pug Henry and his family, another bit of glue holding everything together is the narrator, William Woodson. Woodson guides us through transitions, fills us in when there's a time jump, and introduces us to new faces on Hitler's staff. The show also incorporates archive footage showing actual video from various battles and diplomatic meetings. These are shown in the original black and white, and then at a certain point it switches back to newly filmed material and smoothly switches back to color. The Winds of War covers the period from a few months before the German invasion of Poland in 1939 to the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941. The whole thing works together to convey a potent sense of anticipation and inevitability as the characters brace for war. Is the fictional element always believable? No. One of my chief criticisms is that it just seems so unlikely that Pug Henry would bump elbows with all these key players and so often be in just the right place at the right time. The most far-fetched things Pug Henry does in The Winds of War: he conducts a secret correspondence with FDR about the goings-on in Berlin. He is summoned for a private, exclusive meeting with Hitler. He accompanies the crew of a British bomber in a raid on Berlin, and he attends a fancy dinner in Moscow where he ends up being the guy who sweet-talks Stalin into being friendly with the Allies. Now granted, a couple of those scenes, the bombing raid and that fancy dinner in Moscow, were some of the best scenes, but it's a little incredible that this one guy would be doing all of these things. Plus there's all the stuff he does in the second series, although his semi-ubiquitous status is toned down a little. There's just a lot of story there that he can't be present for. My other complaint has to do with the female characters. There are 5 women who have significant parts, and basically, they're all kind of annoying. I wouldn't mind so much if there was at least one who wasn't selfish or flighty or reckless or flirtatious or wishy-washy or bad at decision-making, but Pamela Tudsbury is the best of the three main female characters in The Winds of War, but even she has her not-so-great moments. That's not to say that these women don't have their redeeming qualities or that I can't see where they're coming from. I'm not asking for perfection, and they'd be boring if they were perfect, and I get why they do the things they do. But, and I'm saying this as a woman myself, I found a lot of their behavior frustrating or infuriating. The character of Natalie Jastrow, as played by Ali MacGraw in The Winds of War, in particular drove me crazy. I couldn't stand her. The character was barely tolerable, and acting-wise, I found the performance unconvincing. Oh, and I hated the way she played her men against each other. Sometimes the way she treats Leslie Sloat is appalling. It was a huge improvement when Jane Seymour took over the role in War in Remembrance. I wasn't so sure about her when we were first introduced to her as Natalie, but then she did just enough things like McGraw to show that she was the same person, but she was 100 times better. And since she's in a lot of War in Remembrance, this turned out well. None of us here were fans of Rhoda Henry either, but at least Polly Bergen did a very good job portraying the character. There's something kind of frenzied about Rhoda. She's very ridiculous sometimes, like when she's really excited to meet Hitler and she's like, "Oh my goodness, there he is! I can't wait to meet him! Quick, introduce me!" And while her husband's eyes are being opened to what's really going on in Berlin, she's just having a grand old time going to parties and hobnobbing with the Nazi elite. It's embarrassing. But on the flip side, there's a much sadder aspect to her character, and I couldn't hate her because of it. She goes through so much, and you have to feel sorry for her, and there's something fragile about her, like she's on the verge of losing her grip. She's got a huge smile and vivacious personality, but it seems more and more like a facade. I didn't love her, but I felt for her. So, War in Remembrance came out 5 years after The Winds of War had aired, and it covers the rest of the war and its effects on the Henry family and those closely related to them. This sequel is quite hefty. The book it's based on is 1,000 pages long, so there's that, and while the miniseries technically has just 5 more episodes than the first one did, if you do the math, it's 27 hours long. That's a lot more than I thought I was signing up for. How on earth did audiences in the 1980s deal with this? The Winds of War was a major 7-night television event when it aired on ABC. How did people have the time? Each episode is at least 90 minutes long. Some are 2 hours or more. That's basically watching a full-length movie every night. With commercials, so it was even longer. Initially, I didn't know what to do, because we don't have time to watch a movie every night, even without commercials. If we did, my What Else I Saw videos would be a lot longer. But fortunately, thanks to the program's neat chronological storytelling, it's not such a big deal if you need to take a break for the night in the middle of an episode. And natural stopping points, where the story transitions to another character in another location, are pretty obvious. Of course, after 5 years, not all of the actors who had been in the first miniseries were able to come back for the second, or maybe some of them might not have wanted to do it, or they might not have been asked. Robert Mitchum is back, thank goodness, as is Polly Bergen, Victoria Tennant, David Dukes, Topol, Jeremy Kemp, Peter Graves, and Ralph Bellamy, who could have made a career playing FDR. The major changes include Jane Seymour replacing Ali MacGraw, which, as I said, was an improvement. Hart Bochner replacing Jan Michael Vincent as Byron, which was fine. I'm not crazy about the character anyway, but I didn't really have an issue one way or another. I think Jan Michael Vincent gave the character a little more punch. And John Gielgud replacing John Houseman as Aaron Jastrow. I think this was also an improvement, not that Houseman did a poor job, but considering all of the things that the character has to go through in the sequel, I just have a hard time picturing him in the role. Granted, beforehand, I would have had a hard time picturing Gielgud in the role, but he was great. I tend to like John Gielgud anyway, so he did have an advantage there. Another big change was the actor playing Hitler. The first time around, Hitler is played by Günther Meisner, who you might recognize as Mr. Slugworth from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. He had a little lisp, not sure if Hitler had that, but I preferred his overall performance. His behavior made it easier to understand how Hitler might have pulled the wool over some people's eyes, how the casual observer might not be sure if he's a brilliant, charismatic leader or just completely insane. The second Hitler was played by Steven Berkoff, who's certainly intense. He had very good crazy eyes and nailed the unhinged, unreasonable egomaniac thing, but I found his pattern of speech distracting. I'm not aware that Hitler talked like that, although I haven't sat down to listen to Hitler's speeches and analyze his oratory technique, but it was totally unbelievable to me that anyone could be in a room with this man and think that he's in his right mind. All of the actor replacements took some getting used to, especially as we'd finished watching The Winds of War just 5 days before, not 5 years before, but it wasn't so difficult, and they lucked out with actors who fit the part, but who also made it their own. The sequel is much heftier. It's longer, it has more characters, it covers more ground in a more extensive period of time. But it also gets into some very heavy content. I'm talking about the final solution. War and Remembrance spends a good deal of time on the Holocaust, specifically what happened at Auschwitz. There were 1 or 2 scenes in The Winds of War that weren't a walk in the park, but there were several sequences in War and Remembrance that were just... There were 3 brutal, graphic scenes in particular that were almost unbearable to sit through. 2 at Auschwitz and 1, the Babi Yar massacre at Kiev. These scenes are not censored. There is a lot of nudity. I guess it got a pass on TV because it was Holocaust related. And it's uncomfortable watching with my parents because all nudity on TV is uncomfortable when you're watching it with your parents. Usually when there are naked people on the screen, I fast forward. But as much as I might have preferred to do that, I couldn't, because it's part of the story. It's part of the humiliation and the horror. I talk about a lot of World War II movies on this channel, but you might have noticed that they are seldom Holocaust movies, and I hope that nobody has gotten the idea that that's because I don't believe in the Holocaust, which is ridiculous. I don't seek out those movies because I don't enjoy them. Seeing the mass extermination of Jews is not entertainment, and I primarily watch movies to be entertained. Watching these scenes, these detailed recreations, and knowing that this really happened makes me feel sick. It should. It should horrify you. And that's why, even though it's awful, and I don't like it, and if I had the choice, and if I knew that it was going to be like this going into it, I might have said, I think I'll skip War and Remembrance. I don't want to watch that. I think there's tremendous value in watching it, and I'm glad that I did. I don't want to watch scenes like that to the point that I ever get desensitized to it. It should shock you every time, and you should be heartbroken every time. And if it makes me feel embarrassed or uncomfortable or unwell, that minor, brief discomfort is so small compared to what these people went through. I didn't think I was gonna get emotional talking about this. Both miniseries do focus more on the European theater than on the Pacific theater. A lot of the fight against the Japanese is covered in the voiceover, and while there are numerous German characters, we see comparatively few Japanese. But that does make sense considering the characters involved, and a large part of the series focuses on the seeds of unrest among Hitler's generals, which eventually grow into the attempted assassination and insubordination. As the program wore on, I did start to feel like the fictional family drama and relationship tension were starting to take over. I'd catch myself thinking, I don't care about this that much. Can we go back to the war? Also, even though I had just watched this stuff, I found myself forgetting how characters knew each other. I'd be like, wait a second, when did Pug and Leslie Sloat meet? How much do they know about each other's personal business? Speaking of, if anyone's wondering who my favorite character was, I think it might have been Leslie Sloat. Anyone who's seen this program, including my parents, is probably thinking, what? That guy? Really? But here's the thing. Leslie Sloat is exactly the kind of character that I would latch onto. He's a quiet, nerdy rule follower, an office dweller. He's not bold or even courageous, but he's capable of heroic acts when pushed. He's faithful and devoted to his cause, and he's chronically unlucky in love. He wasn't one of the major characters, but he was in it a lot, and I enjoyed rooting for this underdog and seeing the way that his character developed. I also can't end this review without mentioning the music composed by Bob Colbert. The soundtrack has several distinct themes associated with a character or a mood, and the lush, pretty but ominous main theme is the kind of thing that gets stuck in your head. Just ask my mom. So if you're looking for a comprehensive, detailed, but relatively compact depiction and overview of World War II, and you don't mind some fictional storylines being threaded in, then this is a good way to go. Of course, if you watch a lot of World War II movies and documentaries, you'll be familiar with a lot of the content. There were several times when an event would be mentioned that my parents and I would look at each other and say, hey, we've seen that movie. But it's one thing to watch a movie of an isolated event, it's another to see that event unfolding in the context of the war as a whole. And there were also things that I hadn't heard about before, like Hitler's massive defeat at Kursk in '43 and the so-called Paradise Ghetto at Theresienstadt in Czechoslovakia. Another thing of interest to movie fans is the parade of familiar faces, too many to mention them all by name. Some were people that I recognized from when they were younger, some were actors that I recognized from when they got older, and several of the Germans were played by men who I've seen play Germans in other World War II movies. There is a lot to take in and enjoy here, and I would recommend both miniseries to anyone who's watched this review and thinks that they sound appealing. I'm glad that I finally watched them. I enjoyed them, my parents enjoyed them, and I want to thank those of you who recommended them to me. And if you were hoping that I was going to read the book, don't worry, I still intend to read the book. Both of them, I guess. I hope you enjoyed this review. If you have seen The Winds of War and War in Remembrance, go ahead and share your thoughts on them if you like. I'd love to hear what others think, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.